Hey guys, I'm gonna run you through how to make a quick Super Mario Brothers coin here, and it's going to just be from Lowpoly baking and into Unreal. I'm not going to do any textures outside of a normal map or an ambient occlusion. So let's just go ahead and get started here. I'm going to go ahead and create a cylinder. You can find that under the Create panel. Well, let me dock this here. You can find that under the Create panel. I'm going to go ahead and rotate this on. Let me turn on. Oh man, there we go. Let's see. We're going to convert this to an edible poly, and I'm going to inset both of these faces, do an extrude, inset this a couple more times, and to get my Mario coin shape here, I'm trying to think how I want to do this. Might just collapse something like that. And this coin is going to be pretty low poly, and so what I want to do is to make sure that because we're baking this side of the coin down flat, I'm just going to bevel in that side so we, from our front face, we got this sort of edge here that we can see. We'll go ahead and double click all of these outer edges, and I'm going to give it a sort of a freehand chamfer here, about like that. Give it some kind of thick, catch a nice highlight, and then with those edges still selected, I'm going to hit the settings box next to the chamfer and sort of do a much smaller controlled chamfer here on all of those edges. And this is just to hold my edge loops. Let me throw my material on here. And so that's sort of our base construction mesh for this Highpoly coin. I still want to put a detail on it, but let's go ahead and throw a mesh smooth modifier on it. Yes, I know my interface is different than yours. I'm going to try to use as much of the standard interface as possible here. So I just threw a mesh smooth on there with 2 iterations. And for the detail, we're going to do this sort of slit cut through. I'm going to go to the front view here and into wireframe, and I'm just going to make a box here and sort of quick align it. That's Shift A by default. Quick align it to my coin, and we're going to create sort of a fake detail here. And what I mean by fake is this is for game development. And so what we're going to do, instead of cutting the shape into the coin and really dealing with any kind of complicated topology. I know this isn't complicated, but just to keep it simple, we're going to go ahead and convert this to an edible poly. And I think I'm just going to delete this front face. Oh, interesting. My hotkey for delete is using draw mode in my recording program, so I can't delete how I usually delete. It's okay. Let's undo that. What I do want to do, just watch here a moment. I do an outline on this, and we're sort of just going to push this out in all directions. Just that single face. I'm going to delete it. Select all those polygons and flip them. And I think that's probably just a little bit deep for the detail that we want. Let me get this the right shape. And then I'm just going to extrude this little outer edge. I held shift and extruded that. Or use the scale tool, hold shift and use the scale tool to pull that out. And I'm gonna make sure to chamfer all these. And let's just run some regular edge loops through here. I just did some connect across both of these. And I'm going to chamfer those to make my edge loops. And really to smooth this out, I'm just going to control drag from my coin onto this guy, control drag that mesh smooth onto the little detail floater I'm creating here. We need one more, maybe two more edge loops on the inside here. Is looking a little soft. Ring. And chamfer that. Ring connect and chamfer. And now we have this sort of fake detail that makes it look like it's cut in. And I'm just going to float that right against the surface. Not into it, but I'm just going to float it right above that little surface there. I am going to mirror this. Copy. You can find mirror on your main toolbar. I'm just going to slide this out to the other side. There we go. And that's going to be our high poly mesh that we're going to bake a low poly from. So there's the high poly. Let's go ahead and make that low poly as well. So I'm going to create another cylinder and just sort of align it real quick. I'm dealing with a high resolution laptop, so my mouse is having a hard time grabbing this gizmo. 90, there we go. And I think for my low poly, I'm going to go with something like a maybe a 24-sided. No, I don't want to do any faceting on this. I don't want to see any faceting. So I'm going to bump it up to roughly 32 and adjust my radius so that it fits my coin. Adjust my height. So that's sort of the start of my low poly. I'm going to give it its own material here. Give it a blue material so we can sort of easily distinguish between the two. And I'm going to go ahead and finish out sort of the low poly topology topology here. And that's just to not really leave any n-gons. I'm not going to extrude this in. This is going to be really basic. I might want to leave an edge here. Probably leave it right about there where that dip is, and just so that I can prevent any kind of stretching or warping in the normal map. And then I'm going to collapse that center face in. Actually, I think what I'm going to do, what I like to do, I'm going to delete my draw hotkey again. Fooled me. Just hit the regular delete key. So what I like to do to kind of bridge this across is really just do a shift drag on a scale tool. And because I have a even number of sides, when I scale just down on the X, they all kind of meet in the middle and it looks like a bridge across. But I have to do a couple more steps. I'm going to hold Control and click on Vertex. Make sure I weld those down. Hit OK, and those are welded down. And then when I flip back to Edge, my edge is still selected, so I can just Control Backspace to remove that edge plus those vertices. So now I got a nice sort of clean mesh here. One thing I tend to like to do before I unwrap, so I might end up waiting on this, but sometimes I like to just connect all of them and turn any edges that are necessary, because game engines, which is where we're headed, game engines don't recognize quads, they're actually triangles. And Max is a lot like that too, where it only shows, it really only works with triangles under the hood, but before you export out to a game engine, it's just good practice to kind of take all your vertices here and connect them across, and turn any that might be kind of out of whack, and not let your export settings auto turn those for you. So really the next thing that we need to do here for this mesh is to set up UVs so that we can bake a normal map and our ambient occlusion. Let's see, all the way down at the bottom of the modifiers, you'll find unwrap UVW. And one of the first things that I like to do when I start an unwrap in Max, because when you model, you tend to destroy things, or to destroy UVs. And so we got all these green seams in here that we don't want. So I'm just gonna Control A to select all of my polygons, and I'm gonna do a quick planar map on all of these just to sort of reset any seams. This will close up our UVs for us. So I'm going to turn that on, and then it's a mode here, and so I'm going to click back off of it to turn it back off, and that sort of cleared out any seams that I might have. And you see that if I go in here and try to relax this in my UV window, it can't quite relax, and so we got to slice this up so that we can lay out each of the parts of this coin nice and flat. Like I sort of said earlier, I'm not doing any advanced techniques in here, so I'm not going to talk about symmetry on UVs. I'm going to unwrap this uniquely, and so that's really going to start with these, the edge of the coin. And so I've just selected all those outside polygons, and I'm going to right click in here and click break. And so there's sort of our edge, and you can see out in the viewport we've created some seams here. We've got that green seam going all the way around. And we got our faces for the coin. Can't really see them in the unwrap window, but we're going to relax those, and there they are. And then to get this coin edge kind of out flat, I'm going to put a seam at the bottom and a seam at the top, and I'm going to right click and break that. So now I added a seam at the top and a seam at the bottom. And so really to get all of these the same size, I'm going to relax them together. And what I mean by the same size is I want the textile density, the space that these pieces share, they should be proportional to the actual low poly mesh. Just to illustrate that, what we can do is we can throw a material with a checker loaded into the diffuse slot, and we can put that on there, and you can actually see that if we have different sized pieces, then we're actually using, in this, what this case would be is we're using less pixels to paint our picture. Whichever texture that we're going to be texturing, we'd be using less pixels to display that information, and then we'd be using more on the outside. And that's kind of why it's important to keep these together, or I'm sorry, the proper proportions. When we have a button in here, rescale elements, I'm going to click that, and that'll sort of snap them both to the same size, but you just want to make sure that you relax everything before you do that. Okay. Whoop. Should have gotten some water before doing this. So I'm going to figure out which one of these is the top, because I want to pack these kind of in a friendly manner for later. So if I click that top edge, we'll see where this displays out in the viewport, and that's actually at the bottom. So I'm going to turn this whole thing, rotate that, check this edge, and that one's the top edge. I'll select those and rotate it 90 degrees. And just to get this started packing, don't rely on this button, but I tend to like to, let's make sure we don't want to rescale. And then let's just pack that, and that'll sort of semi-organize it for us. I'm going to select all these guys and do a freeform mode here, and I'm holding control as I grab this corner to sort of scale everything down. Whoops, I don't know why that's stuck. There we go. Don't do this at home, kids. I just stretched out those UVs, and you'll see my unwrap. It's a little non-proportional, sort of non-uniform scaled here and squashed. I'm not too worried about it because it's the side of our coin. It's not going to have a lot of detail on it, or really any detail. And then those are our UVs. And so to store that inside the mesh, I'm just going to right click, convert to edible poly, turn it back to its low poly material here, and we're actually ready to create our normal map now. And so to begin that process, we have a high poly, a low poly now with UVs. So we have everything that we need to make a normal map. And I have another video to talk about these settings, so I'm just going to kind of run through here. I tend to throw my padding up to 64, just all the way, to sort of fill in any negative space. And then we're going to pick our high poly. I don't name things sometimes, so let's just add all of our boxes and cylinders. And let's see. Padding is 64. You want to make sure that you're using the existing channel and set that to map channel 1. I'm going to hit add a normals map. It says normals map. It's kind of funny. It's really a normal map. 512. I'm just going to do something real small for this. 256 probably would have been fine, but we want it just a little bit more resolution so we're not seeing any kind of breakdown in those maps. So I'm going to set the output for this. To set the output or where you save the file, you want to click this ellipsis button. And I actually haven't made any folder structure for this yet, so just on the desktop, I'm going to create a coin folder. And I'm going to call this map type. It's going to be coin underscore capital N for normal map. And I'm going to leave that as a targa file and hit save. And we want to make sure that that's a 24-bit targa so that it doesn't create any kind of alpha channel for that. Now, something should be said for this render to texture box. You don't want to use any newer materials. This is kind of an old plugin for Macs that some people still use it, but it doesn't support any of the newer Arnold shaders. It didn't support any of the mental ray shaders, and that's just something worth saying. So if you're having problems baking anything out of here, just make sure you're using a generic standard material out of Max for your baking shaders. Now, I think I have everything set up here. I might take this a step further and add a lighting map, set it to 512 as well, and I want to create an AO on top of all of this. And so to create an ambient occlusion, we just want to create a skylight out here, and you can find that under lights, standard skylight. And I'm going to go to my rendering settings and make sure my lighting's turned on. I'm going to go rendering light tracer. And when we went to light tracer, it automatically made it active for us. And I'm just going to bump up some of the, I'll leave it at default settings. 250 is fine. I tend to take this from 16 by 16 down to 8 by 8. I just like the spacing on the rays that the lighting will give. And that's pretty much all I need to do to set that up. We want to make sure we set the output for this too. So I'm going to set the output for that map. Same location, coin. I'm going to call this coin underscore AO and hit save. 24-bit, hit OK. And it looks like we're all set up to render our normal map and our ambient occlusion. Just sort of double checking my settings. All right, I think we're good. I'm gonna hit render. And this is just telling us that it's not gonna auto create a material and apply it to our low poly. It's completely okay. I hit continue. And we do have some artifacting on our floater. It's not creating, you can actually see how the shadow is going underneath our floater, and that's kind of something that you would need to fix up in Photoshop, but I'm not going to do in this particular video. It all looks good. To check these, what I'm going to do, you can actually see our thumbnails down here, and those do look good, but if you wanted, you could right click and open these, and that would take you to Photoshop. That's kind of my quick way to get to these files for checking or to make sure they're baked out properly. Everything looks good though, so I'm going to go ahead and what I want to do is I want to launch Unreal. We want to take this into a game engine, and I tend to like to, Marmoset's a great program, but I tend to like to use Unreal. It's just where I'm doing most of my checking these days for my textures. Marmoset's a nice, fast sort of presentation tool, but you know, our goal here is to be making video games, making video game assets, so I kind of want to put it into something that we can eventually do more with. So while Unreal Editor loads, I do want to talk about setting this particular low poly piece up for export. And so let's isolate this, and I'm just going to click, and I want to center our pivot point. You can go to the hierarchy panel, effect pivot point only. I'm going to center to object, turn that back off, So our pivot point's in the middle of the object, and before we export, I want to make sure that our coin is actually sitting on 0, 0, 0 in space. And so I'm going to go to my move tool, and you guys can do this a couple of ways. You can right click on your move tool to bring up the transform type inbox, and if you're on the move, you can just sort of, you could monkey this around by hand, or right click on the spinners to zero everything out. So that's in a good location. Like I said earlier, I did want to triangulate all of this. This is something I tend to do by hand. I just select all the vertices and do a connect, and that'll triangulate everything for you. I tend to, when I'm in my own workflow, save this as a separate file. I would save the file that I'm baking in before triangulating. File, export selected. I'm going to go to our coin folder, and we want this as an FBX. It's an it says Autodesk file right there, but everyone knows it as an FBX file. Coin, we're going to call this, and hit save. Yes, and it's going to give us some export settings here. I didn't really deal with smoothing groups. That's for another video. This should work fine. I just tend to turn these off. Triangulate, we can keep that on. Preserve edge orientation. Yada, yada, yada. You want to make sure you're using the latest FBX version. You could download those at Autodesk. Units, automatic. Usually I'm in centimeters. This is really not proper, but should be okay. I'm gonna hit OK. What's it telling me? Oh, it's telling me that it saved well, it didn't export a material, but let's do one more quick thing before exporting this guy. And this is something I like to do to keep my FBX exports clean, and that's to remove any materials from the mesh. And to do that, sorry, there's some default hotkey that changed my interface. And so to remove this material, a good way to do that in Max is just in this white box down the bottom left of your Max window. You can hit, or you can type $, material equals undefined, and you hit enter, and that'll remove material off of whatever objects you have selected. Kind of a nice little trick. Max really doesn't have a built-in button for removing materials. And then I'm going to export, just sort of re-export this. So yes, 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 yes. And now we don't get that error talking about our material failing to export. If you're new to Unreal, you can just go ahead and create I'm going to create a blueprint document. It's going to be blank with no starter content. You can change your name here. I'm going to call this a coin. This is going to be the coin game. Really, you're naming the whole game with this, the whole project name with this, but I already have my master project. I'm just going to load it into its own. Create project. And I'm going to pull up my files here so that we can sort of easily drag these into Unreal. So my Unreal might look a little bit different than yours. I try to kind of set mine up like 3ds Max with almost like a command panel and modifier, your world outliner, content browser. And this content browser is really where we're going to be working to pull all of our files in. And so I just sort of pulled out the directory structure over here, show or hide sources panel. going to create a new folder, call this assets, asserts. I think I just, what if I can hit F2? I can, look at that. Assets. And under the assets folder, do a new folder and call this coins, where our coin asset is going to go. I'm going to alt tab to our coin folder, and I'm just going to bring in both of the textures as well as the FBX in sort of one, just sort of click and drag and drop it in here. And you see Unreal is actually importing this for us. I'm just going to go with the default settings and say import all. And it actually recognized that the coin was a normal map and set it to a special setting for us. And we just say, cool, thank you. And we're almost ready to have our coin out in the level. There we go. We'll zoom in here. Go back to our content browser. I'm going to pull these thumbnail sizes down a little bit so you guys can see what I'm doing. And just in here, I'm going to create a new material. So I'm going to right click. I'm in that coin folder. I'm going to right click, new material. We're going to name it coin underscore material. And I'm going to double click on it to bring up the material editor. It's a lot, I wouldn't say it's a lot like Max's. This one's way more powerful. But it's like Max in that it's also a node-based editor here, node-based material editor. So I'm going to grab both of these, the AO and the normal map. I'm dragging both in here. It's created texture samples for us, and I'm just going to plug these into the proper node slots. And I'm going to add a couple of more nodes here. If you hold 3 on your keyboard and click, it actually brings in a constant 3 vector. And if you double click on that constant 3 vector, we can pick some sort of gold looking color. I hit OK. Got a yellow color there. We're going to plug that into the base color. And then I want a couple more values here. If we hold 1 on our keyboard and click, it'll give us a single value. We'll plug that into metallic. Nice. Unreal just crashed. All right, well, I'm gonna pause this real quick and try to get back control of what my computer's. Okay, we're back. Let me just adjust my color here for my coin. Something a little more orangey. So I'll hold 1 to get my constant vectors. Plug that one into metallic. Hold 1 again, click. Plug this one into roughness. And I want to set that metallic to 1, value of 1. And then have a roughness of, I don't know, somewhere around 0.6 or so. All right, when we have our material all set, I'm going to hit apply and save. Save that. I'm going to close that material editor, and I'm going to double click on our coin FBX here, and I just want to make sure to load it into the material slot. So I'm going to take my material, drop it on that coin. You can see it's now applied to that FBX. That's why we didn't bring our material in earlier, is because we wanted to create our own material. If we exported that blue material earlier, it would have showed up in our Unreal. And then hit save on that coin FBX. And that's pretty much how we get something from Highpoly and into a game. You get Highpoly, Lowpoly, make sure you have UVs, bake it, export it properly, and set up your material. And there's sort of our coin, our Mario coin. If I want to duplicate this, I can Alt drag. So I may do this tutorial up a little better at another point, but this is to help some of my students. But that's sort of the base idea for getting a game asset into Unreal. Thanks for watching.